The US government has officially shut down, and I wanted to get this information to you, but Camel Finance is the person that actually gave me this information. So you can actually go to his Twitter, also his YouTube, search it up, you will get it. But this is vital information that I wanted to share with you guys today. Now, before I actually show you and play this clip, there's one thing that I do want to say. Now, although this guy's opinion may be true, there's also a contrary opinion which could be a possibility that this news does mark the law and prices can increase in the future, because the previous government shutdowns have had no significant impact on the price. There is maximum a short-term correction in Bitcoin, a maximum of 25% for gold and silver, things of that nature, including the S&P 500. So 10% pullbacks for that is common, so it could come down to its moving average. But this is another avenue to look at things, and it may be a controlled demolition, and we already know that the dollar is not to be trusted in. That's why we look at things like Bitcoin, silver, gold, even Ethereum and altcoins. But I'll play the clip now.
Today, of course, marks the day where the government is officially shut down, okay? And people have been asking me about this pretty much every day for a little while now, and I've been quite dismissive of it, mostly because nothing really tends to come of these government shutdowns, at least nothing of interest to me as a trader, right? Normally the markets just kind of shrug this stuff off, nothing really happens, who cares, right? I would say normally this has less of an impact than something like CPI or FOMC, where normally then we get a bit of chop and games and volatility for a day or two. But this time is slightly different, and I'm going to show you why. That's why I'm covering this in a bit more detail today. So I saw this, and this is what made me actually do a bit of digging, right? Apparently this is what the president wants, because this is a quick way to reduce costs and start to lay off government workers. This time around, the government's going to be closed, and certain key economic data releases are not going to be coming out on the normal schedule, right? Because the government's going to be shut down. So the macro is harder than ever because they continuously lie about the data. And now we're having to deal with this, right? Shut the government down and don't release the data at all. To me, as a quite paranoid individual, this just feels a bit fishy to me, but we're going to continue to get through this. I'm not really calling for anything spectacular, although, as I'll show you in a moment, we are going to head for some cycle lows in the short term for the stock market. So this is quite interesting timing, at least pertaining to those cycles. And speaking of the economic data, okay, we got Chicago PMI just come out on a 40 handle. This is super significant because any print below 50 is indicative of economic contraction, okay? And a print above 50 is indicative of economic expansion. But you can see that we have been in a recessionary look for some time here, and it's not showing any sign of recovery, at least for now. The other couple of things that we're interested in is JOLTS seems coming green. Okay, fine, we got more job openings, marginally more, that is. But remember the article I wrote that was actually extremely well received, showing things like non-farm payroll jobs created, okay, still very recessionary at the hard right edge, and the job openings for manufacturing extremely recessionary as well, right? So I don't really think it makes much difference, right? It's going to take an awful lot to undo some of this. And then of course we've got the things like consumer confidence coming in red as well, below expectations, significantly below the prior readout as well. And here we got the United States consumer confidence straight from this article. Again, look at the hard right edge, right? Extremely recessionary look here. And as if all this is not bad enough, now they're going to shut down the government and not release any further data, right? Like with PMI looking like this. So this is kind of a weird situation to be in, right? And it's so weird that it has me, somebody that is very openly distrusting of the mainstream, turning to CNBC for answers, okay? So this is by no means recommended. This is by no means me saying this is a trustworthy or reliable source of information. But I thought for a change of pace, we'll just go to CNBC and see what they think about this. The stock market typically glides by these previous government shutdowns. As I said, like not really much happens, right? That's why I normally don't pay too much attention to this. This government shutdown is likely going to result in the furlough of about 750,000 federal employees. And over the weekend, the president has been threatening mass firings of federal workers under the shutdown. So it goes back to this idea here that it's likely that we're going to get a bunch of layoff and costs cut as a result of this government shutdown. The average daily return during the funding gap tends to be pretty much flat, right? So again, it speaks to the CPI and the FOMC being significantly more volatile than these government shutdowns, hence why I tend not to pay too much attention. But this time around, the market is likely to focus on the length of the shutdown, since a prolonged closure could delay key economic data ahead of the Federal Reserve's meeting late October. I would love to hear from you guys, right, in the comments. Does this speak to them cooking the books even harder than they already have been, right? Is that what this is really about? Or is it potentially that we're about to get extraordinarily weak economic data and they're trying to do something something to kind of hide this fact. The Labour Department said on Friday it will shut down virtually all activity, meaning the September non-farm payrolls report would not be released at the end of the week. And in the case of no jobs data, the reading on private sector job creations from payroll processing group ADP on Wednesday morning is expected to take on greater significance. So again, this is what I've been talking about over and over again, isn't it? Like, they release some data and you look at the trend and you try to do your macro analysis and you try to figure out what's going on, only for them to quietly revise the data down. And now we've gotten to the point of just straight up shutting the government down and we're not going to get the data at all, right? This all, to me, seems extremely fishy. And this is why I'm such a proponent of actually heading into a recession. I don't think the people that are saying that we can go up only for a while, or no more bear markets, or Raoul Paul's ISM 5-year cycle, I don't believe these people are right. For the simple reason, if they were, the government wouldn't be doing all this jiggery pokery and chicanery to hide the fact that the data is recessionary, right? If the data was legit and there was actually no recession risk, wouldn't they just report the data as it was? If everything really was okay, I don't think they would need to be doing all of this stuff, right? And again, maybe my tinfoil hat's on too tight, maybe I'm just way too paranoid, but all of this to me kind of seems like they are clutching at straws here and doing everything in their power to kind of patch over the holes in this sinking ship, to slow the rate of the sinking down. And again, like even CNBC are reporting this here, right? The lack of government data, especially with the all-important BLS jobs report on Friday, does lend a concern, as it was due to be released during a recent period in which the labour market showed signs of weakening and was a catalyst for the Federal Reserve to reduce interest rates just a couple of weeks ago. As I'm reading this, now I'm wondering if perhaps it could be the other way, right? Maybe this jobs data was about to come out incredibly strong and we're about to get the first real signs of relief here. And that would mean that the Fed could maybe go ahead and not start to cut rates, right? Or pause the rate cuts at the moment. Something that the president doesn't want, right? So is that what's going on here? Does the president understand that actually the jobs data is about to reverse trend and we're about to swerve a recession and the soft landing call is actually correct? And maybe he's stepping in here, stamping his feet and pounding his fists on the table saying, no, we must have rate cuts, right? And to be honest, I don't think that's likely. I think it's much more likely that they are doing everything in their power to hide the fact we are already in a recession. But you can see here, right, the complexity of this is incredibly high. Like, it's so difficult to deal with this macro data set as it is, let alone with all of these games being played at the same time. The last thing I wanted to point out is this right here, which is normally these shutdowns end fairly quickly and they pass without much dislocation to equity prices. But in the meantime, investors are going to have to lean into other data to try to figure out what's going on. But that's where we come into our own here, isn't it? That's where the Camel Crew has the real advantage, the real alpha here, because we actually don't need the data, we just need the...
That's crazy, bro. That is actually crazy how... I know things are pumping right now, and it may be good in the short term, and we all are sitting in profits, but gold isn't going up for no reason. It's never been on an 11-month uptrend before. And don't get me wrong, I do see signs of consolidation, and I think it will correct moving forward, especially after silver makes all-time highs. But something's going on. I'm going to leave that at that, and you can decide on what you're going to do, because genuinely... whatever you pick may be the right or wrong answer. Who knows what's going to happen moving forward. But it's crazy, and it actually interests me going into this much detail, looking at the economy, looking at people hiding things. Things just seem fishy right now. And you make of it as you will. It's madness, man.